event of the year. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm like so just thrilled to have found everybody, and it's kind of nerve-wracking and also very exciting to be considering uh, just having a dialogue with you all on this very prestigious date, I think, of 1 year. And I certainly, over the COVID quarantine and such, trying to figure out, where I can play in the future of what my role can be as far as humanity and education. And I've worked for a long time in New York City for the past 25 years. I'm an Italiarista, so I'm someone who's been sort of swimming upstream in the world of education for a while, because I come at it from the art studio, which I know many creative people are here understand, that sometimes it's been a struggle in our history, especially if you're older, to get credit for thinking through visual and other ways of creating and meeting the world. And so my introduction to Reggio Emilia came when I was studying at Pratt, in art and design education, and ready to quit. I didn't want to be there. So I wanted to quit because I was studying exhibits of children's work and I couldn't find anything that inspired me. I went everywhere, all around the city, everywhere you could think of, and just wasn't inspired, until I saw the 100 Languages exhibit, which was the first exhibit that came in the mid-90s to New York City. And I got to see the work firsthand and see the thinking and see the intelligence of children that this city in Reggio Emilia had managed to transport across the ocean and put up in a gallery in Soho for a couple of months, and it changed my life. So as an artist, I have spent my career as an Italiarista, and as an Italiarista, I don't define myself or the role I play as that of an art teacher. So anything that I'm going to share with you now totally comes from my experiences as an artist inspired by Reggio Emilia, working in both private and public schools, early childhood through college, students at Pratt Institute, always with the what I learned fundamentally from Reggio Emilia, which is that children are citizens, and that as citizens they have rights, and that within those rights are their rights to be in relationship with the world. And if we're thinking about young children, and if we're thinking about infants who are first born, and I myself gave birth to 4 children that I raised, you know how highly intelligent we are as human beings when we're barely on this earth. So what happens as far as our roles as we grow and mature, to support the absolutely, like, just that gorgeous intelligence of humanity that school, I feel, has dimmed. And we're in a state of crisis now, and we're trying to figure out, and the question tonight is, how can we create, I'll have to look now to see it exactly because we talked about it so much, but creating a space for emergent learning. And vocabulary is so important when we have this discussion, I feel, because it's not emergent curriculum, and it's not, because curriculum has a certain definition. And just like I don't want to be an Italiarista, I don't want to be understood as an art teacher, not because I have anything against art teachers, but because the role I know that I play is not the one that people define as being an art teacher. So working for the past 25 years in facilitating and mentoring teachers and facilitating work with young children and elementary school children, I've discovered a few things that are really pivotal, I think, in being able to actually consider something as emergent learning. And the main key to it is that in order for it to be emergent is that we have to let go of our control. We have to let go of our hierarchy. And I know that so many of us understand this who are here listening, but it's a really hard thing to do, because our automatic thing is to control in some way, or in the best way. Like we're our intentions are 100% golden, but we're interfering too much. I think personally, I think that children have an incredible intelligence and competency to address things that we're not always paying attention to. And so the thing that comes from Reggio Emilia that I have tried to exercise in all of my work has been the practice of documentation, and it's the practice of documentation, which is not even it's a it's the action of pedagogical documentation as a process for understanding where you are with a group of people, what the goals are for learning, and how you can build the next steps for it. It's phenomenally Reggiano, like it's very much came from Reggio Emilia in a very authentic, culturally emerged from them in a way that's hard to transcribe sometimes. So, and it's also very contrary to what I've experienced in New York City in terms of being able to honor children's inquiry. And in particular, and I'm going to share a little bit of work right now before we have a dialogue, in particular, how do we honor children's inquiry when they have been devastated by a trauma as a group? Because this is what's been on my mind, and this is why I mentioned to Sam that I wanted to, curate this conversation, because I think that children are arriving, or we're figuring out new ways of being because of the pandemic. And are we considering, and do we have the tools to consider where the children are at and what the children are needing? And I'm talking about, I'll say children, but I'm referring to all of us at any age. How are we being supported to create this new way of bringing humanity forward from the very beginning? And if we honor the fact that infants are born highly intelligent and intuitive and understanding of the fact that they need relationships in order to survive, well, how are we continuing um, to nurture those relationships? And so, in the nature of being, in the nature of development, what can we do to provide space and time to continue that intuitive quest for knowledge and to trust it? And I think that it takes some risks, and it takes a whole different way of looking at community of learning. So because a lot of you don't know me, and I feel like I'm like introducing myself here, uh, I'm going to briefly share a little bit of a project that was done with children, and I want it to be understood. It was created in collaboration with elementary school teachers and myself in New York City 2 years after 9/11. So this is a population of children and teachers and community that endured 9/11 we were right there on West 15th Street and in our neighborhoods, which were even closer, et cetera. So we had a year of working where in school we had been told, like, we have to stop the kids from talking about it too much. So what happened is the children came to school, and they I'm going to share an example of something to give a little history, because I think it's really important that if we're going to deal emergently with understanding how children are learning, we also have to create spaces where they can have a history together, where they can develop relationships together. We need to stop like bouncing them around so much from classroom to classroom and group to group. I think it's highly beneficial for them to get to know each other, and also to get to know the adults that are facilitating whatever learning environments that they're in. So very quickly, I'm going to go through the beginning of this project, because then I just want to really share at the end of it what happened. And I want you all to understand that what I'm sharing with you now is my interpretation and one of my first attempts at what it means to actually document what is happening in order to understand and facilitate an emergent idea that wasn't even always accepted by the school as a whole, because, we had other curricular things that the children were supposed to be attending to. So providing the time and finding the time for this was really critical, but also understanding that the children, because we had relationships, the children demanded the time, and the children asked for the time, and the children figured out ways to create the time for them to be heard. And that, I find that that's so important, because I think that traditional schooling doesn't give enough emphasis to the value of hearing children. It's so much more about, the opposite. So when 9/11 happened, school continued 2 days later, because we were just one block north of the cutoff. So when that happened, the children, can I share my screen?
Yeah, I think you
Yeah,
can
go ahead. You should be able to.
just click on the share screen, Brigid. You should be good.
Where is it?
In the bottom, right next to the chat. You see that?
Got it.
And then if you click on it, and this is, I'm sure everybody knows this, but if you're ever doing share screen, in the lower left, if you're sharing sound or video, there's two little boxes that you can check that will allow for sound and audio to be better, just so you know.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Is that good? Do you see that,
Yep,
everybody?
that works.
Okay. So what happened is 2 days after September 11th, when the attack happened, our children were back at school, and they all came back, and none of the parents passed away, but all of them had connections to things. The children called on me and as the studio teacher, and they called on the librarian, and they waited for us to come to their classroom to talk to them. And what they said to us was, we noticed that there's a lot of people who aren't getting information, and we want to, I'm sorry, can you see that? Because it's cut off.
Yep.
And they asked us, they said, we want to make a magazine, because we saw that when people go to the newspaper stand, they don't have papers left, or if they do, they have to pay for them. We saw that if the at St. Vincent's Hospital, people were waiting and people couldn't get the information they needed, or find out about the person that they lost. So we listened to them, and we gave them the opportunity to create these newspapers, which they did that very day. So on September 13th, they left school with 85 copies of each of these and many more, these 6-year-old children, and they walked around the neighborhood handing out their newspaper and saying, here's the news, it's free. Because for them, there was a problem. People weren't getting information. They had a solution. They knew that they had resources at school who would help them, and they did that. And it was amazing, and it made them feel like a part of the community. And I think that that's a really important thing to understand when we talk about emergent learning, because children aren't just living inside of the school buildings that they inhabit. They're all around, and they notice things, and they brought that to school to make something happen. The other thing that happened right after 9/11, and this is all with the same children, this is another group of children, but who would meet later when they were a year older. So these children were in Chelsea Market, and it was our first expedition out of the school. We went down the block, and we went down the block because we wanted to draw the pumpkins and give the children a normal thing to do again, like we were, getting back to normal, right? We arrived to draw the pumpkins. We spread out a big paper, as you can see. And as the children were drawing, we heard these big footsteps, and all of a sudden there was a squad of firefighters, and they were walking into the market. And I didn't take a picture because we were just like so stunned, but they stood in between the children and the pumpkins, and were like kind of, checking them out and watching, and they were very quiet, and the children slowly stopped drawing, and they looked up. And they were a little nervous, because here it was, mid-October, maybe 6 weeks after 9/11. And they looked up at the firefighters, and the chief said, "Did you do this?" And he pointed to their drawings, and the children, nodded yes. And then the fire chief and all the firefighters started applauding. So these are two things that fueled a whole year later the confidence in the children to understand that they had a voice, that they had rights, that they had people who were interested in what they had to offer to solve a problem, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and that's something that I learned in Reggio Emilia that really was very, very important in terms of the city and the municipality. It is about the community, and it is about the city and the lawmakers and the administrators recognizing that children are citizens, and as such, they have different rights. And their rights fundamentally is to a learning environment that respects them and cares for them. And so within all of that come all of the things of understanding how capable they are. So I'm going to skip through this part because there's an awful lot. What happened was the children came to school in September of 2002, and their teacher had a playground study planned. So I encouraged, and it took a lot of negotiating with administration. I encouraged the teacher who I was mentoring, so it was easy encouragement because she was great, a new teacher, to just go explore playgrounds. So they were doing a playground study, and she had pre-planned, she had already ideas of what she wanted them to learn. But what we did agree on was that parents would come along, that we would go to visit lots and lots of parks. We live in New York City, so there's plenty of them. And then we would listen to what the children had. So we had to afford 8 weeks of time. So this is when I'm talking about time and emergent learning. We have to trust that in time something will happen, right? Because you could look at this and be like, okay, so the kids went and played in playgrounds for 10 weeks. Okay, fine. But what happened after that is that why do I think you can't read this? Is this cut off, the image?
It is cut off. If you want to hit the play button there on the top, that'll take care of that.
Thank you.
And by the way, Brigid, can I just put in your email for everybody so that if anybody wants to follow up with you? Okay. So I'm going to do that in a second. Go on.
Okay. So whenever I'm thinking about Reggio Emilia, and I know that, there's many educators here who are inspired by many different approaches. The one thing about Reggio Emilia to understand is that it's not a methodology. It doesn't come with a package. It really is about the relationships that you have within your own community, and the relationships that children have with their community, and the relationships that they develop around their inquiry, around their sense of belonging in their community. So it can't be a methodology because it's so interdependent on the culture of where you are growing together. And so I like to always consider the words of Loris Malaguzzi, who is one of the founders. And this is something, I just share with you to read. But it's very, very important that this understanding of identity and ability and autonomy through relationships with peers and adults, that's like such a core fundamental piece that when we are working with young children and considering what they're doing and seeing where they are and wondering what they're talking about and listening to them, really listening. And Reggio, they call it the pedagogy of listening. So what happened is, after all of these trips to all the playgrounds, the teachers were listening to the children, they were recording their conversations. And they came to me and to others, and they said, they keep talking about the towers, and we're not allowed to do anything about, we have to stop talking about the towers. It's the second year, and what are we going to do? Everywhere we go, they keep talking about the towers. But the fact was that they were going to parks that were memorials. So on every placard that they saw, it said, like, this is a memorial park playground built for this doctor, or built for this civic leader. So when we read their conversations, we saw that they were really talking about what was happening in the present time. And when I think about being an artist, and I think about being an Interiorista, something that that I heard recently, and that I've heard before from a musical artist whose name will come to me in a second, is that to be an artist means to be a voice about the times, that we are, as artists, constantly responding and expressing ourselves about what is happening now and what is going on. And so we understand that children too are doing that. So I read their children's conversations from the various parks, and this is the question I posed to them about a memorial, what a memorial could be. And the thing was, all of this is on, and I shared a link in the chat. I think I did. Maybe I just sent it to you, Dave, but I'll share it again. There's a link where the full documentation of this is formatted in a PDF as well as online with Project Zero, which was a study group out of Harvard that did some research work with Reggio Emilia. And you can see the beginning of all of this project and what was happening. And because we were documenting, which meant because we were listening with every tool we had, like photographs, transcribing conversations, looking at children's work, looking at children's drawings, giving children the opportunity to share with us what they were thinking in many different ways. In this particular instance, what we found is that we had a conversation about a memorial and they said certain things. And all of this, I will give you a copy for some. I'm sorry to rush you through it, but I want to have us to have time to talk. But what happened is that after we spoke, they drew, and their drawings did not represent what they spoke about. Their graphic representations shared a whole nother level of emotion and of things that they were thinking about. And this is something that because we were documenting and because we were seeking as many ways as possible to glean understanding from the children about where they were at, we were giving them as many tools as they could to express what they were thinking, which meant it was not just verbal and certainly not written. These are 6- and 7-year-old children. So their other representations then were quite horrific or scary, and they had hiding places and escape routes and all sorts of things. Climbers and jumps and just like, wow, it was just, whoa, okay. So that was 1 hour with the children. That whole thing was 1 hour with 8 children. So then we had another 8 children coming in for an hour. So I didn't want to ask them the same question because we had paid attention to what we had just done together, we thought we should ask them a different question. And when I'm saying we, I'm talking about myself, the assistant studio teacher, the classroom teacher, the head of the school, and as well as the classroom teacher's assistant. So there's a collaboration here, and that's really necessary for emergent work to work, is to be in collaboration. So we posed a different question about how they would feel. And then all of this that I'm sharing with you now, this is being shared with you because it's what it was created to share with grown-ups about the story of the emergence of this project. But all of this also that I'm sharing with you was on the walls of the children's workspaces. It was in their classrooms. It was in the studio. It was in the hallways. It was in notebooks. Everything that we're seeing here was available for the children to look at and study again and think about again and reconsider. And that is the magic of documentation in terms of it being, it enables the ability of children to autonomously reflect on their own work. So as we're working, this is the process of pedagogical documentation. They're reading, they're thinking about things. They're going, oh, hey, what did she say? And if they can't read it, somebody else will read it if we're talking about literacy and other things. But also what they're learning is how to negotiate with each other, how to listen, how to understand what's important to each other. For some children, it was very important to be brave. For other children, it was very important that they had places to feel good. And other children brought all sorts of other things. So I encourage you, I'll put the link in the chat for you to look at this because it's really deep and we don't have time to go through all of it now, except to say that the children are really smart in their design in the end, of their idea, like when it was decided that they're going to pursue this and make something happen. They designed their park to be its own island in the Hudson River. And one of the major reasons that it would be its own that was a good idea, was that because then they wouldn't have to have meetings with all the neighbors about whether or not they liked what they were going to build. So they already knew enough about their culture to know that there were things they could be proactive about. And one was making it its own island, because then they wouldn't have to meet with the neighbors. So all of this is, these images, these transcribed conversations, all of this was available and visible all through the process of this, for parents, for children, and for teachers. And so because all of this is happening, it's constant, even though we only met once a week in the studio, the children were talking about it all the time in the classroom. We were bringing other things into it that had to happen, like for whatever was happening in the classroom. Everything was being connected, everything was being related. Here we had a child who didn't want to participate because it made him too sad, and the children automatically gave him a solution. So, we don't always see those things or hear those things happening when we're very busy giving out materials or trying to grade them or score their participation, or worried about a child who's acting out. But when you start documenting, and when it becomes an integrated part of the process, it's an amazing thing, because the children also begin to slow down, and they begin to pay more attention to how they engage with each other. And they also begin to pay more attention to whether or not you're listening, because if they think something's important, so here he was hesitant. So then another child came up with an idea that he could build the bridge, he wouldn't have to come on the island, and there would also be a clown to greet them. So all of this is like, none of this could have happened without the collaboration of everybody. And also, none of this could have happened if the children weren't given all of that time in the beginning to explore. So how do we provide exploration and experiences that will, and how do we use this inspiration of documentation in order to continue to facilitate ideas and things? And it's not about taking one idea and making a project out of it. This is very specific work that came out of a very specific group of children who had a very specific history. And all of that, I think, is stuff that we need to consider when we're considering how we can create environments for learning in our own settings, with our own cultures and with our own things that are going on. So what happened is, I'll let this play for a second while I tell you, all of the children worked on their design. We made blueprints. They did all sorts of things in the classroom, in the studio. They owned it. It was their work. They were constantly coming to us with lists, and we were there offering them space and time and just listening, because while they were, putting things on the wall, other children were painting and other children were building, and they were discussing what kinds of materials it could be built out of, and whether or not they should combine certain ideas with other children's ideas and things like that. So all of this happened, and by Christmas, they had created their design, and this is the blueprint of their island. It's designed to look like the shadow of the towers over on the Hudson River, which is, things the children knew. So all of these ideas emerged from the children authentically, although some of them had to be amended, because what happened is we took the children to see the exhibit of what was going to be built. So we brought them out in the community, down to the World Trade Center site, where they looked at proposals, and I'm going to, for the sake of time, not go through all the points of this this design, except to say that it is the most comprehensive memorial park design that one of my friends, who was a firefighter widow from 9/11, had ever seen, and she had a lot of them coming in her mailbox. But the children believed in this so much that even though school was over, they wanted to share it. So they sent it to somebody. They sent the blueprint and a letter to a child who'd lost their parent, because they thought that even if they couldn't get their park built, that it would be beneficial emotionally for children to imagine that they could play there, because it had so many things in it that addressed what a grieving child or a traumatized child would need. So we went down to the World Financial Center. And this is where, you know, the children became disruptors, because what happened is we couldn't deny their continued engagement with this work, even though school had said it was time. As one of the Alex said, it's, you know, we got to study French fries now. We can't work on our park anymore because there was time. It was time for a restaurant study. But we negotiated and we worked it out, because what happened is the children went down to the financial center that when we got back to school that January, and they saw the designs. These are some of their notes, what things that they wrote when we traveled. And they brought with them copies of their park design. We looked over ground zero. They saw what was happening down there. So this is a year and a half after it had happened, and they had designed their park and they wanted to build it. So they looked very closely at all of the models and everything that was built in the that was shared. These are all the office designs. So these were not memorial designs. The first things that the organizations did was a competition to see what the office buildings would look like, because obviously they needed their rent. So the children looked very closely at every design and considered what the design said. They compared the designs to their own work. They wanted to speak to the designers. They had all sorts of ideas, because they owned their park and they understood that their park meant something, and they wanted it to be built. They really did at this point, when they saw that there was a competition and all of this was happening. So they compared, you know, authentically as their own, you know, look at their serious faces. We spent the whole day there. They had a lot of feelings about it. So here are conversations where, you know, even in this one where you can see Jacob was very moody. Jacob was very, very sensitive to how these things were going to make him feel. And that was something that we were able to bring out in also with the families, with the school, with classroom conversations around things. You know, there were so many things that the children were comfortable in being vulnerable about, that then played a part in how they brought ideas to the table for what we were doing. So here they asked if they could build a model. And they asked if they could talk to the mayor, because they thought the water was really dirty, but they, you know, they were totally connecting to this being a reality. We got back to school. They created a model out of clay, which you can see in some of these pictures, and they actually did enter the Lower Manhattan Developmental Corporation official competition for Memorial Park designers. They were the only children that entered the competition that we know of. And we, you know, what you're looking at is the board that we had to put together. So we had to put together, to the specifics of the competition, this board that illustrated and answered their questions. We also went to a meeting, and you can see in that block at the bottom, there was a website where the children could go and they could see, that's myself and one of the children and some of their parents went to a meeting to discuss what was going to be built and to remind them that they should think about the children. So this is them building the model, which I'm not going to go through. But one of the things that constantly happens when I speak to Reggio educators is they ask about John Dewey, and they want to know what happened in the States, because they are so inspired by John Dewey, and we seem to have lost our way in that. So I find that this quote from John Dewey is relevant all of the time. And I feel like honoring children as citizens.
Anybody see in the news
Sorry,
recently that
stop that. I think that if we can change our perspective of how we see children, to understand them as having rights as opposed to needs, and if we can open up the time and space to give them opportunities to reveal to us what they see as the problems and where they can find solutions, it's really important. And even if this isn't a solution to a problem that they were able to realize, it was a solution that was very important to their development to realize to the best of their imaginations and with the most engagement they could with the powers that be of their surrounding community. So, you know, it's all about relationships. And I think that if we could learn a lot from looking at what Reggio Emilia does in terms of documenting and sharing documentation of the processes and the thinking and the challenges that their youngest citizens have in order to you know, offer them what they need in terms of the city's responsibility, the culture's responsibility, and just the extended family and community's responsibility to honor the rights of children as learners. And we're responsible for understanding what that means. And we have a lot of new information to go on. So where can, you know, as far as brain research and stuff. So how can we create that time and spaces and relationships, or create the space for them in order to afford more emergent ways of learning? We can go to the group view now. Do I do that?
Thanks, Brigid. So, Brigid, would you like to pose a question to the group?
So
Would you
yeah,
like to field
I don't,
questions, comments?
I feel like such a newbie here and I really don't know a lot of you. But this was a work that really sealed for me the importance of education as a relationship amongst families, community, and outside of school walls. And so, yeah, love to hear your thoughts on or questions.
Brigid, it's Robin. I'm interested to know what some of the dialogue was with parents along the way and their contribution with this. It seemed as though it was integrated, as I understood or gathered.
Brigid, what was the role of parents in this? Are you there, Brigid? Interesting.
I think that democracy is really important. I see somebody just said that democracy and emergent learning in action. And it really is, because I can't hear, no, Dave, I don't know who was talking because I didn't hear them.
Yeah, that was Robin, do you want to ask
It
your
was
question
me.
briefly?
Yeah,
again?
I
Because
was wondering.
Yeah,
I was wondering how the parents involved were integrating with this process, if you would.
So a question about the role of parents in all of this. I think that one of the critical things about documentation in the work that's done in Reggio Emilia and in the work that I see done around the States with colleagues and also in other countries is that the process of pedagogical documentation is a key to relationships with the parents. Because when parents see the thinking and when questions and things are made visible, the parents then become engaged in a different way, and they see where their children and other children are engaging in negotiations. They see where they're questioning things. They see what, you know, just what the vibe is in the classroom, and then they can contribute to it, you know, and then they want to participate. Then they say, oh, hey, I saw you were, you know, the kids were figuring out something about whatever, and you know, I got a lot of loose parts that maybe you could use them, you know. So I think that documentation is a critical part of the relationship of families in Reggio inspired practices, because they get involved, and also it works in reverse, where the children can see documentation about the parents too. and see when the parents have come to do things, and when the parents have had meetings with the teachers, they'll often leave something behind, and then that the children can discover. And also to understand that in Reggio Emilia, they now have experimental, still considered experimental, elementary schools. So it's a long haul. But I think the process of documentation has given power to the movement, because it's evidence, it's there, it's history. And it's also the gift that keeps on giving, because every time you go back and look, and I encourage you to look at anything that the Reggio Children has published, and to follow the North American Reggio Emilia Alliance, because they have an exhibit from Reggio Emilia that's been going around. Because anything that you look at that was published by Reggio Emilia, almost all of it is actually a publication of documentation of a learning experience in their schools.
And Brigid, I just want to flag for everybody, I'm putting into the chat. I don't know the website offhand, but if you
I don't know why I can't hear you. It's so bothersome.
Oh, you can't hear.
But I see a question about how emergent learning is being fostered in remote learning during COVID. And, I think that that's one of the main things is why we need to listen to the children. we need to stop plopping solutions on them for about how learning can happen during COVID, and start listening to them for their solutions to how to best learn during COVID. If that makes sense.
Brigid, this is Rixa. I'm out in Washington, and I am part of an independent school out here, and
I'd love to hear some other people talk.
Would you like me to start over or stop?
You know what, Rixa, for some reason, we can all hear each other and Brigid can't hear. So I want you to ask your question, and I'm going to do my best to communicate with Brigid via the chat.
Perfect.
All right.
So we are out in Washington. We're at an independent school, and we are noticing a lot of monster play. I call it the bad, like focused on.
It was a really interesting question, Brigid, from Rixa, and it was really, well, let me see if somebody else wants to weigh in on it before I summarize the question. All right, then let me broaden it and invite Brigid and others to respond. Because one of the things that Brigid said at the very beginning, the question was specific about creating space for children to make sense of all of this trauma and the monsters, and how do we cope with that. But of course, Brigid said at the beginning, and it's just as true for us, we're all struggling to navigate the monsters of this time, right? COVID-19 is about to be COVID-22. And obviously there are beautiful things that have happened as a result of that. Like, let's be honest, this would not have happened before COVID, but that's a lot. So I'm just wondering for Brigid or for anybody else, what, if the original question that Brigid invited us here to contemplate was the way that learning emergently can unlock things, unlock awareness, unlock connections, what have other people's experiences been through this particularly monster-infused period of COVID around learning emergently that feels important enough to share with the group?
I would share, in addition to the question, that one of the key components that we've taken away is slowing down ourselves as educators and doing much deeper looking ourselves, and to really thinking about what connections are the children making, what are they telling us through their actions and through their work that they're doing. I have seen educators really taking a deep breath themselves, which of course has deeply benefited the children as well, because they're now in a space that educators aren't putting themselves as forcibly into, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think just in terms of the monsters and when children bring that, they're bringing it because they're working something out. They're bringing it because they have to figure something out. And so who are we to say you can't be scary when the world is so scary, right? Because I know teachers like to make everybody feel safe. But, well, an example from this time period, one of the children working on this project earlier had been making some building a ship that had all sorts of secret compartments that would protect the city if anybody tried to attack it. It had major ammunition, everything that everybody except the art studio and the availability of open-ended studios allowed him to do. Everything else in the culture of the school is telling him he couldn't. And it was found out. I told the teacher that he was creating this and please honor it, because they were all creating vehicles for their block area. And I asked if it could be honored, and the teacher, rather than it wasn't honored, because he was told it was a very good job, but you weren't allowed to have violent things in the block area, and he had created something very violent. And it was really unfortunate because it wasn't honored. Later on that year, the children actually went to the top of the Empire State Building, in the middle of all of that year and everything, right? They went to the top of the Empire State Building, and that child who created that fabulous ship that was going to protect him wouldn't get off the elevator. And I know intuitively that part of the reason he wouldn't get off the elevator was because he was deprived of his play and building and creation of something that was going to give him some strength to face the trauma that he was being subjected to, because 7-year-olds thought a plane was going to hit the towers every other day for years. So I think that when we think about that, the monster play and all of that, then that's where really listening and bringing, listening and sharing that listening back, saying, I heard you say this when you played, or putting some of the children's language with images of them playing those monster games, and use it to create a dialogue so that then anybody really can be a part of figuring out what it's about. We can't shut it down.
In that spirit, first of all, I just want to name that we're a little bit past the top of the hour. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap. So I just want to say that I'm aware of that. I also, in the spirit of what people are talking about, and also as a reminder of just how remarkable this group of people is, Adrian, the person who asked the question that led to this conversation, is herself a remarkable artist and has created this artist grief deck. So this idea of dealing with monsters and processing grief in this period, there is a particular resource from just one of the other squares in this conversation that speaks directly, I think, to the types of things that some of us are talking about and yearning for. So thank you, Adrian, for that work and for being here. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions or comments. Who would like to offer one? Yeah,
just-
Kathy. Oh, sorry. Let's do Kathy and then Richard.
Okay. I'm getting so many memories of 9/11 because I ran a school in Washington, D.C. And so it just comes flooding back. But I'm thinking about another time at our school when Katrina happened. We all remember that. And our school embraced a family who had lost their home, had friends in Washington who could host them, and they came to DC to figure out what to do next with their life. And their 5-year-old boy joined our school. And that little boy, every single day for weeks and weeks, came into the classroom and went straight to choose the art area. And every day he would draw the same thing. He would start from the beginning and draw a river. And the river held a man upside down floating in it. And it was obvious that, and when you inquired a little bit, that the man was dead. And it was obvious that the little boy had seen this probably out his window before his house was gone. And we literally just allowed. And every day he did his work. And then there came a day when he walked into the classroom and chose another work. And the teacher stepped down and knelt by him and said, I see you have chosen a new area of the classroom. Can you tell me a little bit? And he said, well, the man that I drew is now in heaven. And it allowed us to understand how important it was to give that child the dignity of working through that process.
That's beautiful, Kathy. Thank you. Richard.
Yeah, I just wanted to call attention to something I put in the chat, which is an exhibit that's still standing in Healdsburg, where several hundred kids were invited to make hopeful monsters, most of which are sculptures about that big. They're on stands in this empty building, and it was a way for them all to process several years of massive fires followed by COVID-19, and no real way to express their experience of that. And it was named Hopeful Monsters because the dialogue that went on as they were making these was about the future, not the fires or even COVID.
Brigid, I think I'm going to give everybody a chance to close as a group in a second, but would you give us a final thought or a last word before we do that?
Sure. I think this has been great. Thank you. I too, like, this was a project I haven't revisited in, 15 years. But it was speaking to me to share with everybody, because I do think that, we will always be evolving through trauma, and we need to figure out how to best, emerge healthier and stronger through it, right? And not wait until we're adults in therapy to figure that out, but that children and human beings as we grow offer an awful lot to that process. And just a note about what was just said, when a child draws something, every time they may draw the same thing, but every time they draw it, they're thinking about something new, something else. They're evolving their story. And that was so nice, Kathy, and Richard too, what you said, because that is what it's about, giving them time to work those things out without making a judgment based on an observation that we as an adult think that they're, perseverating or stuck on something or what have you. Yeah, and I would just like to say, the process of documentation as inspired by Reggio Emilia is really complex, but once you sort of get it in you, it is an act of love that really gives to the entire community a whole new way of looking at how we learn and why we want to learn what we want to learn. So yeah, I just think it's all about caring and love and respect. So, thank you.
Well, in that spirit, thank you, Brigid, for curating this and guiding us through. So grateful. And as my 9-year-old reluctantly is led to his bedroom nearby, just a final 4 minutes Quaker style before we all go. And I'm going to offer this particular prompt, but feel free to ignore it. Just something you heard over the last hour and 15 minutes, and or something you thought that is going to stick with you in the best possible way, so that our final thing tonight can be just getting a window into what those things are for each of us. And again, Quaker style, you don't have to say anything, but if you do speak, please don't speak again. So I'll start. We literally just allowed.
Children as citizens.
I was awestruck by the patience and the love that of the mood of this experience together.
Emergent work is best in collaboration.
Children are citizens and have rights to be in relationship to the world.
I want to participate in this process.
Looking and learning from students' work helps us move from the world of I, it, to the world of I and thou.
Agency can be expressed in healing.
I was moved to remember that children listen with their hearts and how deeply they listen.
Going once. Going twice.
Look for the light even in the darkness.
Let the children be the disruptors to bring participatory democracy. I look forward to following up with you, Brigid. I'm very interested in talking more. Thank you. I'll reach out by email. Thank you.
So thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. Just a reminder, I'll put it at the bottom of the chat. We now have finally gotten our act together, and we have a virtual network that is a place where not only you can find out about upcoming events, but you can connect with one another, like Brigid, she's on there, and share whatever suits you. So join us there, and hopefully we'll see many, most, all, some of you back in this space a week from tonight, when with our partners of the Nomadic School of Wonder, we get to usher in a ritual way, 2022 together in a way that I think has a chance to make it a little sweeter than it might otherwise be. So hope to see you in a week. Thank you again, Brigid. Have a great night, everybody. Or for those of you in New Zealand, a great morning.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Good to see you all.